Well, hello, Angela.
Hi,
It's
Kristen.
good to see you.
Yeah,
I
you
was
too.
just I was just telling the boys that I was chatting with you. I was like, "Remember
Ah,
Angela who played basketball with you?" And they were like, "Yes."
that was a while
It
ago,
was a
but
long time
yes,
ago. They were little. Now they're like maybe as tall as you.
I'm not that tall. People think I'm taller than I actually am. I
Is
think they
that
probably
right?
are.
Okay.
Yeah. And I
You seem tall to
remember,
me, but I'm very short.
I think both of your girls were like fighting for my attention
I
because
think they
I
were.
wanted to play basketball with, with
I
them.
know. And then they were like,
They're like, hey, look at what I'm doing. Someone had like transformed your garage into, I don't know what they were doing, but
sounds right. It was probably like a cardboard box town or something. Well, for people who don't know you, Angela Tucker, you are just a preeminent voice in the adoption community, definitely a guiding voice on transracial adoption. You have a documentary series and website, and you have a book coming out in September that I can't wait for.
yay.
And you have just been a huge influence in my life and in my understanding of transracial adoption because you have had that experience as well, being adopted into a white family. So, talk to me a little bit about, how is it feeling for you? Because you've been talking about race for, this has been your, adult life's work,
Life's work. Yes.
literally.
Yeah.
How's it feeling then to watch this thing that you've been championing, talking about, turn into a national conversation finally?
Well, it's like I think what a lot of black and brown people are saying right now, which is like, okay, good morning, welcome.
Welcome. Come on in.
Yeah. Um, Specifically within transracial adoption, it's been interesting because for years I've been like pleading with white
Mm-hmm.
adoptive parents of
Mm-hmm.
who have kids that are brown or black about the
Mm-hmm.
importance of the conversation about race, and
Mm-hmm.
it has been met with like, yes, I understand the importance, that we'll get to that, like, yes, we're committed, but like
Mm-hmm.
not right now. And now
Mm.
the urgency it's a little bit disheartening and sad because like everyone is reaching out like, oh my gosh, I wish I had done this last year, I wish I had the talk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing, um it makes me think about, there's this one chapter in my book where I'm talking about one of the youth, an adopted youth that I work with, who's Ethiopian.
Mm-hmm.
She's 15 years old, and she had had this experience where she went to a friend's house who's a black friend who has black parents, is not adopted, and that person, this was like a couple years ago, that her friend's parents were like adamant and like not mad but really intense in their voice talking about racial violence in specific regards to police, like, this is how you
Mm-hmm.
need to act, you need to say
Mm-hmm.
that, you need to do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went home, and sometime later her parents were like, gosh, we're so sorry that you might have to deal with this at some point in your life, and we hope you don't. And she was just like, to me, which it
Yeah.
was just a one-on-one conversation with me, she was like, I don't know if I'm ready to go out into the world because I see how differently my
Yeah.
parents talk to me about this. So am I going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, that is such a crystal clear example. So I included that in my book just to be like,
Yeah.
the realities and the impetus, the feeling, the depth of feeling, it is just different.
Yeah. It definitely is different. I remember shortly after I had adopted Jafta, I had a friend who was black, and at this time there had been it was like a national news story where there was kind of a high speed chase happening in LA, and it was two black men, and a lot of people were presuming that they were innocent, but they were evading police for like days. And I remember saying something like, why don't they just, if they're innocent, why don't they just stop and talk to the police?
Right.
And my friend D being like, you
It was
do
like,
not
you don't get
understand.
it. Yeah.
No, and I
Right.
didn't get it. I still don't get it. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm still wrapping my head around the mistrust that the black community has for law enforcement and how legitimate that is.
Yeah, and not just law enforcement, but like
Yeah.
a lot of the our medical
Uh-huh. Social
models.
services.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like when in some of my work, I'm starting to talk about asking and recruiting Black families to formally adopt the Black kids that are in our system. And it is met with a similar kind of mistrust and resentment that,
Mm.
like, the child welfare system has been
Yeah.
breaking our families apart.
Uh-huh.
Like that's what it's been doing. It's filled with
Mm-hmm.
well-intentioned white people whose idea of what a
Mm-hmm.
better life is in a predominantly white space. And so I'm like, yeah, like this
Mm-hmm.
is the structure too that
Yeah, right?
you might need to burn this down and start again, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
built for Black families to stay
Mm-hmm.
together. Um,
And talk about that for a minute, because I think a lot of people who are not in adoption spaces or adoption conversations may not be aware of, when we talk about racial bias and prison, or, preschool to prison pipeline and some of the other disparities that we see. Talk about what we observe in terms of disparity of Black children in foster care, for example.
yeah, that there are not more Black kids in foster care than there are white kids, but there's a
Right?
disproportionality. So there's in proportion to
Right. To general population.
yeah. And so the reason is rooted in racism.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have white kids in an affluent white neighborhood that are being neglected, there are a lot of resources that go towards helping that family
Mm-hmm.
before removing them and putting them in foster care, whereas
Mm-hmm.
for Black families it's the first instinct is to
Mm-hmm.
remove them. CPS is coming to get them and then they'll be in
Mm-hmm.
a new family.
Mm-hmm.
So then when we're now asking Black people to come into the formal adoption system and adopt, they're saying like, well, these are the very same people who really don't inherently believe that our families should stay together.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, why would I give my personal information, like my social security information and all of that, over to this department that has done
Mm-hmm.
wrong with this kind of stuff?
Right.
Or,
Or invite them
but
into my life and my home to judge if I'm
yes,
fit.
right.
Yeah.
Like, so that's, and then on the other hand, we have this dominant narrative that white people come and save the day. And even for families and people like yourself who are like, I do not view myself as a savior, that
Mm-hmm.
when, like, for example, when I go to adoption camps, which are places that are just specifically for like transracial families to be together for
Yeah.
a week, like if I look out and I see a sea of Black and brown kids and a sea of white parents, like the subconscious sees that as like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, brown
Mm-hmm.
people need adopting, white
Yes.
people do the adopting, and so are the
Yes.
adopters. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, the individual adoption is often so individual. Like each
Mm-hmm.
parent is like, I'm adopting these kids because I love them and I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to give them the best life, but an inability to see how that impacts the whole.
Yeah. And the optics of it, and then the misperceptions too, where the reality is Black people do absolutely adopt Black children, but they tend to do it informally,
Yep,
in a more
yep,
kinship situation. But they are, because I think that's people are like, well, why aren't Black people, it's like the Black on Black crime argument of adoption. Why aren't Black people,
oh,
adopting?
it's,
They absolutely are.
yeah,
They're
and
just not going through
this
maybe the same
formal
channels, right?
system, right? Which in many ways is more beautiful and akin to
Yeah,
like the collectivist. Like, yes,
absolutely.
grandma is going to raise
Uh
this
huh.
child, or the next door neighbor sees there's a
Mm-hmm.
need. And so it's very like collectivist. Whereas
Yes.
this culture that we live in
Mm-hmm.
the United States is like individualistic and like
Yeah.
the nuclear family is two parents, 2.5 kids, and
Yeah.
they're within the house, and that's it. There's no other way that things can look. When in
Yeah.
reality, it's like, oh, of course there are.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, what advice would you give white parents who've adopted Black children who are maybe watching all of this and going, okay, I've bungled this. I haven't done, I haven't done the work. I haven't had the conversations and I need to have. And they recognize, like I've got some work to do. What advice would you give those parents for moving forward?
The biggest piece of advice that I'm working really hard on is to validate the voices of people who have the lived experiences.
Yeah.
So for adoptive parents, that's listening to adoptees and
Yes.
not like tuning out what you don't really want to hear. So for
Uh-huh.
example, there's a tendency if an adoptee shares something that maybe doesn't fit with your worldview, like an
Uh-huh.
adoptee might say, like, uh, my parents told me that God placed me in their lives, and I'm so excited to know that. And that feels, that's like, I'm so glad that
Mm-hmm.
there are many people who are like, oh my gosh, like, don't use the God thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so then just to push that off to the side. When
Right.
in reality, like, that's their valid experience right now.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm.
of the things that like I thought when I was younger, they've all morphed and changed as I've
Yeah.
gotten older. And
Yeah.
so it's to like accept the myriad of voices as true,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not exactly how you want to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because um, I was just having a conversation about how even in the race conversation outside of adoption circles, I think white people really struggle with when they're listening to black voices and then the black voices don't all agree with one
They don't
another.
align.
Right.
Yeah.
And then white people are like, well, I don't know what to think. And it's
Okay,
like,
what?
okay,
Right.
well, life is nuanced and complex. And like, you
Yes. Just
take,
like black people are not a monolith, adoptees are the
yes,
same. And we are so
absolutely.
varied. Like, I wanted to search for my birth parents and
Yeah.
find them and search in a certain way.
Uh-huh.
And other adoptees are like, no, I'm not into searching. And I
Yep.
truly believe that all adoptees like do have a lot to grapple with coming from that first loss, that severed
Yeah.
connection. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that all adoptees want to search right now
Yeah.
today. And I think
Yeah.
there's pressure that I hear from adoptive parents when their kids say like I don't want to search right now. There's this pressure to be like, Angela, can you help us change their mind? Because we hear all these
Because I want to
adoptees
do it
saying,
right.
yeah, I want
Yeah.
to do it right. I think adoptive parenting is an interesting conundrum because you get
Yeah.
like this stamp of approval, like, yes, you are fit to parent, and
Yeah.
we have this big document to prove it. Now you can go to court, and that with that, I'm assuming I'm not an adoptive parent, but must come with so much pressure to like do it perfect when you already have that as a parent. I know you've written about this a ton
Yeah.
about just parenting.
Well, and it's so interesting too because I think, I think it's such a journey because it's like you go from probably starting at cluelessness and then you start listening to adoptee voices, but then there's a tendency to then kind of do what you're saying, which is, okay, I heard an adoptee say something, so now I'm going to project that onto my child. And well, I'm listening to adoptee voices and I want their approval. So now, if you're not wanting to search, then you're doing something wrong. And now I'm going to project another person's experience and feelings onto you.
Yeah. I mean, does it fit with regards to like everything else in parenting? Is it similar? Like, do you
Yes.
see?
Yes. It's like you have to take it is exactly. You have to take all the parenting advice in, and it's all conflicting, right? And you have to take all of it in, and then you have to like assimilate it. And then you
And
have to
decide,
apply it to the child you have.
right? And you already know your child's demeanor,
Yeah.
their like what they're into, what they're not into, and you're like, I know this isn't gonna fit, but maybe I should
Yep.
just force it because other
Right?
people.
And
Yeah,
every kid is so different. I mean, I have two adoptees, and they both have very different views of their adoption, very different experiences around their feelings of loss, really different,
yeah, as it should be, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
just two different kids with totally, and it's so dependent on their personalities. Like the way they view their adoption is consistent with the way they view life, right? Like,
absolutely. I've said that a ton because I am like super curious about
uh huh,
everything,
uh huh,
everybody.
mm-hmm.
I'm always asking questions. I've
Yeah,
always asked too many questions. I remember my parents bought me, when I was little, they bought me the book, like the big book of Tell Me Why. It was like this humongous
Mm-hmm.
book, and it was just like, why is the sky blue? Why is the like everything? And I loved it. And
Yeah.
so when it came to my adoption and the opportunity, when the law in Washington state, I couldn't legally search for my birth parents till I was 21. So when I turned 21,
Mm-hmm.
it was the same thing. Like, I had been wondering all my life, who is it? But I was also curious, like, how does this process work? Like, how come
Yeah.
I can't just know until I'm 21?
Right. Who
Why did,
decides that? Yeah.
right. So consistent with my personality of just
Yeah.
like deep curiosity. And so
Yes.
then when people try to apply it to other kids, I'm like,
Yeah.
well, let's start with the basics. Like, are they curious about, like, who made my glasses and how long did it
Right.
take them? Or like, if they're not, then
Yes. It's so true. Because my child who's a little bit just like, like, I don't really care.
yeah,
That that is on brand for how he approaches everything in life. Like he just is
totally.
like,
Yeah.
whatever. Where, another kid is just a little more thoughtful and a little more, like I don't know,
Yeah.
thinks through things a little bit more, and they think very differently on that topic.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about how white parents talk to black kids about race when they have not had that lived experience.
It's like such a contentious thing because I've been
Yeah,
feeling more stronger and stronger that um, there are some things that need to be outsourced.
I totally share that view. Yeah,
It's tough
yeah.
because, and like, to explain that, my thought is, my parents didn't know how to play piano, and
Hmm.
so they didn't try to teach me to play piano. They
Oh,
sent me
that's
to a
such a good
piano teacher.
analogy. Yes,
So simple, right?
absolutely. Right. Like why question that at all? Yes.
But with race, it's so much more charged. And then, like we were talking about with like parenting, that for
Yeah.
some reason feels, I don't know. But yeah, and so I feel that Black kids need to have certain conversations with people who've experienced it.
Yeah.
Because, like the example I gave earlier, the parents were well intentioned, but the like, the intensity was
Hmm.
missing.
Yeah.
And that's really key.
Yeah.
It's contentious though because for if a white family doesn't have relationships with Black people to come in
Hmm.
and have some of those conversations or hang out and just be
Hmm.
together, then
Yeah.
it can feel like the help. Like, it can feel like a white
Totally.
person is hiring a Black person to do this part of
Totally.
parenting for you, and it's like, that's awful.
It's it's very awkward. It's yes. I think it's very awkward. I think that is why, when white people set out to adopt black children, they need to know who's going to do this.
Who's in your circle?
Who's in your circle, and
Yeah.
if you don't have it, you need to find it
Or not do it.
or not
Like,
do
maybe don't
it.
adopt because clearly
Right.
this has not been an important enough part of your life. So why would it become important now? I think
Yeah.
some adoptees struggle with that too. Like, my parents didn't become interested in learning about civil rights for Black Americans until they got me.
Yeah.
And that feels like a lot of pressure and
Yeah.
kind of a disappointment. Like,
Yeah.
you want it to be authentic and genuine.
You do. You do. I mean, it's interesting because I had a bit of a journey on that where, um, when we adopted, I have black nephews and who are much older, so they're kind of in an adult role with my boys. And I was like, well, this is great, in the family.
Yeah.
Um, but they don't live in the same town. And so it was like, yes, we have wonderful experiences when we're vacationing together or visiting, but it's like,
Once or twice a
this isn't
year.
every day, right? It's like, it's
Right.
not, this isn't working to get them into their local black community. And so then
Yes.
I had to switch gear and I had to go, okay, well, we're going to get involved in a black church. We're going to do the black Boy Scout troop. We're going to do 100 black men. We're going to like do
Yeah. Yeah.
do the community development camp for black kids. Like we're going to put ourselves in to those spaces, which, I will say, I think is uncomfortable for some white people because we have not had the experience of being the minority.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Which I'm like, I wish it was uncomfortable for white people to adopt us in the first place.
Totally.
You know,
Well,
like
it
that's
should be. I mean, you should be
right.
signing up knowing, like anyone who signs up to adopt transracially should know I will have many experiences of being the only white person in the room now.
It should. Yes,
You should.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
should.
And you know what? Here's the thing I will say I am so much better for it. And the experiences that, like, I don't see that as a challenge now. I see it as an add on, if that makes sense, like a value add, you
Well, I
know?
think that's where, you know, when white flight happened and people are like, I black people are now like redlining is kind of
Mm-hmm.
subsiding and so black people can move into our neighborhoods like peace, I'm out. Like that that decision that like my life would be better without this feels
Yeah.
really hard. And I hear the same thing when people are like, yeah, I live in a predominantly white space, but we go to black events on
Mm-hmm.
occasion. I think like, wow, so the absence of black culture really is a value almost, which is
Mm-hmm.
really the opposite of what I hear you saying, which is like the diversity of diversifying your extracurricular activities, your friend group,
Mm-hmm.
your life has only added to the diversity of experiences, of happiness, of life, of complexities, of like,
Yeah.
I firmly feel like a diversity of thought
Yeah.
is going to lead to just more innovative thinking, more innovation. Just it's like,
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, like, I feel that, I actually feel that my white daughters benefit as much from these
mm,
experiences. You know,
mm,
that they have just grown up comfortable, like being in all black spaces. Like, no
mm-hmm.
big, we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Like,
unique for them because so many white people can go through their whole life without
yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, and I think it goes into what schools we choose, you know, what neighborhoods we live in, like all
Well,
those choices.
yeah, I mean, race is embedded.
Yeah,
Systemic racism is so embedded in our society that, yeah, I don't think you can turn a corner without it being impacting something around you.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Is
and I think one thing I always hear when people watch my documentaries or whatever is like, I can't believe your parents are okay with you saying this and that. And I
isn't
find
that
that to be
funny?
fascinating.
Me too. Because I relate to your parents so much because because they're just like, yeah, okay. Like,
Yeah, and I think a little bit proud too. Like they're proud that
yeah,
I've come into finding
yeah,
my passions, and it does intersect with them a bit, but it's also completely separate, you
yeah.
know, and they don't take offense to
No,
my beliefs on adoption.
yeah, yeah. I I appreciate that, and I feel like even learned from them in watching, your documentary. I think that being a good transracial parent really does mean humility in a lot of ways. It's having the humility to know that I have to outsource, like you said. Like I can't be their guiding light on race. I can't. Someone else will have to do that. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's being humble enough to say, that their interest or curiosity or even connection with a birth family doesn't threaten me in any way.
That's the biggest thing.
It's big, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And the other thing I think, and this is like really the crux of my book, is adoptees need each other because
Yeah.
we get each other. And
Yeah.
this book really stemmed from me realizing that all of these conversations that I was having as I mentored adopted youth, these adopted youth had wonderful parents, lovely.
Mhm.
And but there were things that these adopted youth felt like if they shared them with their parents, it would elicit too strong of an emotion from their parents, so much so
Sure.
that they felt like they might be abandoned again.
Yeah.
So to say like, I miss my birth parents,
Yeah.
or I wonder about my birth parents, that if
Yeah.
their adoptive parents emoted, like
Mhm.
cried, or got
Mhm.
really had
Yeah.
some big reaction, that was like too much. And
Yeah.
so they're like, I'm not going to do it again. So then they
Yeah.
talked with me, another adoptee, who
Uh-huh.
I'm not personally attached to that story. And
And
so
you're
it felt
safe.
safer.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the things that these adopted kids were telling me, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's needed information. Like your
Yeah.
parents want to know this. And so the book is like a compilation of those types of
Mm-hmm.
stories,
Mm-hmm.
anonymized, of course. But
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that because I think Out of the Mouths of Babes is like so
Totally.
strong, so important, so unfiltered, especially in a sector of adoption where you feel a strong need to filter everything and say like, I love my parents, but there's this and that, or I'm so grateful I was adopted, but like
Mm-hmm.
these kids don't have to do that with me or with other
Yeah.
adoptees. You just talk.
I think that's so true. That safe space is so important to talk about all of that. Yeah. Um, that I mean, that is one of the reasons I too feel really strongly that, people who are considering a transracial adoption should consider more than one child, like,
Mm.
so that they don't have like the solo black child
Another
in a white
place
family.
of feeling alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I really can't imagine one of my boys being alone in my family. Like it actually makes me sad to think about if they didn't have each other.
It's hard to know. Yeah, I can see that. And also I think like you don't know anything other than what you grew
Yeah.
up in. So like I had a huge family, lots of
Yeah.
siblings, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine how anyone is an only child. Like
Yeah.
what? But certainly having siblings who are also adopted did
Yeah. Just that they have
make a difference.
a mirror racially, to share that racial experience with, but then a mirror to share the adoption experience with too, I think has
Yeah.
been really helpful for them,
Mm-hmm.
that they've
Mm-hmm.
got one another. Um, Talk to me too about, adoptive parent. Like one of the things that always concerned me was really wanting my boys to feel comfortable in their own community, right? So knowing how to walk into a black space and feel comfortable, and knowing how to code switch, or knowing how to just be black in a black space and not be the kid where everybody's like, do you have white parents? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
um how,
Yeah.
how do how do how do white parents make sure their kids are comfortable in all black spaces when they're being raised in white spaces?
I mean, I think it's part of what you talked about before. Like, representation is everything. If you don't see like someone that looks like you doing XYZ, then you really don't ever feel like you can be that. You can
Yeah.
fit in there. So for me, I feel like embracing my blackness really started happening when even like online, I started
Yeah.
Pinteresting all these
Yeah.
beautiful black women who had
Yes.
4C type hair, like my same texture.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, because before that, I'd really struggled with my hair. I did
Mm-hmm.
wigs and weaves and braids and everything to like cover it up and to look more like European standards.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I could see not just another black woman, but a black woman with my same hair type, and
Mm-hmm.
that was when I was like, I can be beautiful too. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can wear my hair natural too. So it's like the black identity, since it's not a monolith, like needing exposure to all the different types
Yes.
of blackness is so
Yes.
important. And I think
Yeah.
like when I think about your boys, they're Haitian. Like they need to
Mm-hmm.
see the darker skin tone. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself, I now talk about this with confidence, but I was realizing how often I was using the Instagram filter that made my skin brighter.
Mm.
And I was like, once I realized that, I'm like, what is going on? And it was just that I
Mm.
had been surrounding myself with people with like be not there's you could have like two pictures of Beyonce, and one is like
Oh yeah.
makes her so much brighter because that's
Yeah.
what white society feels like is
Yeah.
prettier, is
Mm-hmm.
smarter, is richer, and all this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, wow, I have some issues with colorism. And
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't until I could see like the myriad and the spectrum of black beauty that I was able to identify what I was doing and then make a correction to it.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like, um, Kembe's Haitian, Jafta is from the US. And so Kembe has these two identities. You know, he has a Haitian American identity and he's an immigrant. And, he immigrated at 3.5. He wasn't a baby. He has memories of living in Haiti, but then he's also black.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that for a minute, if you would, because I know a lot of people, white people adopt internationally, and then it's this interesting thing where they'll call their kids Ethiopian, and they'll really identify with that culture, but maybe not as much with black culture. Like maybe they don't quite understand that, like, well, your kid is going to be seen as black here,
Right. I
regardless
mean,
of how you identify it.
I only can speak to that through like the adoptees' perspective of
Yeah.
what I've heard, and how difficult it has been for adoptees, international, transnational adoptees, to feel like they fit, like specifically Africans who have said they do not feel like they fit with Black Americans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That it's a separate thing altogether, and that they then struggle with finding their place and their space.
Interesting.
And that's really a struggle. And what I've heard from transnational adoptees is they consider feeling most at home with other transnational adoptees, which is
Interesting.
like another subset, and it's
Yeah.
still othering. And
Yes.
because if they go back to their home country,
Right.
can't
There's
speak the
not
language
always
perhaps,
acceptance.
and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
um I've felt a little bit of that, even though I'm African American. I was born in the States here. There still is a difficulty, it feels, with Black Americans that are not adopted to accept
Mm-hmm.
Black adoptees' experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I felt that a little bit on Red Table Talk, and it
Yeah.
was really, I think, it was an accurate representation of the multiple ways that I've felt rejected over my life by the
Yeah.
Black community,
Yeah.
which is so tough.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a real tough one. Yeah. I think, and from a mom's perspective, it has been interesting to like, not feeling always accepted as a family,
Uh,
like there being a little bit of a barrier of like, and then I'm like, but it's my kid. Like, I
right.
don't care if you don't like me. It's like, so I think adoptive parents do have to, like just push past, like, there may be some families that aren't super big fan,
Accepting.
and you just keep trying,
Yeah.
you know.
I think with the Black community specifically, there's a big generational difference,
I think so too.
which makes a
Yes.
lot of sense.
Yeah,
You
it
think
sure
about our
does.
history. Yeah.
It's generational, and it goes back to that mistrust we were talking about with law enforcement. There's also just some mistrust of
Absolutely.
why does this white family have a black child, you know?
Absolutely. I just posted something on Instagram because I've been so grateful to have folks donate to one of my service offerings, which is to mentor
Yeah.
adopted youth. And I have heard from adopted youth who want to work with me but don't want to tell their parents, or
Mm,
their parents are like, you need to pay for all these extracurricular stuff you're doing. And anyway, so I'm so grateful to have a scholarship fund. And so one of
yeah.
the youth that I was working with through this fund, um, she was on social media, and she shouldn't have been. Her parents were like, you're too young. But, you know,
As
she's a
they
kid.
do.
Yes.
Totally.
And so she was on social media and she found her biological parents on it
Oh,
and friended them,
yeah.
started talking to them, just doing the normal.
Yeah.
And her biological parents said something about her parents being white and how they didn't know that. They were just like, we knew you were adopted, of course, but we have never thought that you were being raised by white parents. And
Oh,
so this girl
how
wrote to
hard.
me and was like she didn't realize that would even become an issue. Like, she takes
Right.
her parents, she loves them, and
Yeah.
so that is a huge. She was feeling a lot of
Mm-hmm.
nerves and shame,
Yeah.
and how do I approach this? And so we've been chatting about that. But I remember too when my birth mom was, when we first met, And I hadn't asked any prompting question, but she had said just out of the blue, like, yeah, it's okay that your parents are white. It's cool. I'm okay. And I was like, where did that come
It
from? But
kind of
oh
feels like
yeah.
it's maybe not, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that I mean, it's so complex. It really
It's
is so
so
complex.
layered.
Yeah. And I think, it's like I think white parents have to understand that there is going to be a variance of opinion and experience in the black community, and that is what I mean, as you said, that is why you have to just have a really wide experience, a really wide experience. I mean, it was interesting. My boys are involved in a black-led organization here, and their response to the protests was just different for me. Like they were like, we're not involving ourselves in any of them,
Hmm.
where most of my friends, like outside of that organization, are like
We're going to
rally
everyone.
and
Yeah.
march,
Right.
get get your bullhorn, get your posters.
Hmm.
And I was like, this is it was just like it's a valid choice for them, that's how they feel, but it was just like a reminder of like this is why you really need to have like a lot of voices, right? So that it
Yes.
just doesn't it isn't just the one, and you're going like, well, I guess this is the black answer. This is
Right. I mean, that reminds me of Chimamanda Adichie, who has this powerful TED talk about the danger of a single story.
yeah.
And I just love that TED talk. I watch it
Yes.
often.
So
Um,
good.
but it's the same
Yeah.
thing,
Isn't it? Yeah. It really is. Well, and the danger of the single story too then becomes Candace Owens, or you know
Exactly.
white well, not conservatives, white people who were not interested in anti-racist work finding the lone black voice confirmation bias to then
Confirmation bias,
become a
yes.
spokesperson for them.
Yikes. Yikes.
Yikes.
I can't
Yeah.
go that direction. I can't.
I know. I know. Well, and then, oh gosh, and then, sometimes you see, like, there are some times when I'll see, like, a young black person speaking on certain social issues and just taking a very different stance than what would be expected. And I'm always like, where are her white parents? Like, hmm,
Where did you
who's,
learn that?
who's raising
Yes.
this child? But you never know. I mean, I actually have a very good friend who's black, and her parents are Republican, and she's just mortified. Trump supporting.
So hard. And I've had so many conversations with Black adults this week
Yeah.
who are talking about how their parents won't talk to them about George Floyd, don't
Yeah.
believe that it's a thing. And
Oh
here they are,
gosh.
like Black men who could are seen like
Yeah.
George Floyd, like
Yeah.
Trayvon Martin, like, but their own parents are like, no, nothing's happening. And it's just heartbreaking. And so for those people, I'm so glad to be able to be
Yeah.
a service, a support too.
Absolutely. Because it's not just heartbreaking, it is, but it's dangerous. I mean, you are
It's
putting
dangerous.
black lives
Yes.
at risk if you have not
Yes.
explained all of this to them.
Absolutely. It's one thing that I'm really scared about
Yeah.
is the generation of transracial adopted kids, especially dark brown men
Hmm.
who are growing up without these conversations.
Right.
I'm very terrified
Me too. Me too. And I hope if there are any, adoptive parents watching, like these conversations need to be happening frequently.
for, like, yes, a matter of life and death.
Life and death. Yeah, I tell my boys all the time. I say, well, we have a saying, which is, "Don't get mad, get even." And what that means is, if you are having an altercation with a cop, and you feel that you are being treated unjustly, you don't react in anger in that moment. You remind yourself in your head that later I will get an attorney. Later I will have my day in court.
Hmm.
But when you're in the moment,
You've got to
you need to get
just
home. You need to stay
do what,
alive.
yes, you just have to stay alive. I mean,
Hmm.
makes me think
And
about,
so
like,
all that, so it's like channel that anger to future, not now. Like right now, you just have to focus on getting out safely.
yeah, yeah. that's beautiful and crappy, and that's where I
It's
think
so crappy.
white parents have the hardest time, because it's like that's
Yeah,
not the answer you want to say. You
it
want to
sure
say like, if
isn't.
someone is abusing you, you never accept that. Like in every other
Yes.
realm, you're like, I
Yes.
don't tolerate it. But as a
Yes.
parent, like the thing you have to do right now is say you can't fight back.
It's so weird. I think about that dichotomy all the time of just how, the messages that we want to give our kids: stand up for yourself, stand up for injustice, defend yourself, right? Like, be
Yeah,
bold, use
but
your
not here.
voice, but not here.
I mean,
Huh.
I'm feeling like that's how some of our littlest kids are going to have issues with like playgrounds, because they're becoming a synonymous with like coronavirus and
I
germs. And so
know,
I'm like,
right?
oh no, they're gonna, or like all the honking birthday parties. Like once they learn how to drive, are they gonna like think honking means I get presents? Or
It's
like,
so funny, right?
but the associations are like
Yeah.
different than what we've always communicated. Like
Yeah.
honking
It
means this, the
is.
playground is this kind of space. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the police is not, does not have the same rules.
And I mean, we have, and parents should be having specific conversations like, your hand is on the steering wheel. You don't grab your ID until you've said to them, I'm grabbing my ID. Like, we role play. We go through all of the scenarios, you
Which is
know?
so important, especially in a high adrenaline
Yeah,
moment when you
right.
can't think, you're reacting. So if you've practiced it before, that's how
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when I was little. My parents and I role played what to say when someone was like, "Where's your real mom?" Or "That's not your
Yeah.
real mom." I was always felt like hot and sweaty and
Yeah.
like stuck, and so we role played it, and I
Yeah.
decided that I wanted to make it into a joke. And so,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm like in elementary school, and so when people would say like, "Is that your real mom?" that I would pinch them and be like, "Yeah," and they would be like, "Ouch." And I'd be like, "Yeah, when I pinch my mom, she says ouch too, because she's real." And that was like
Oh,
all I could do to diffuse it.
but that gave you a
And
story and a script, and
gave me a script. It gave me
yeah.
permission to like leave really quickly. I didn't have to
Yeah.
look embarrassed. I didn't
Yeah.
have to like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I've had to do that a little bit with Kembe and India, who are the same age, and they don't always want to answer the long story. So it's
Oh
like,
gosh. Yeah,
we've given an
no.
elevator script, like, yes, he's my brother, he's adopted. Move on.
Yeah.
Like, how do we
Yeah.
move out of that conversation if you don't want to be in it?
And part of my work is also talking about ethical story sharing for adopted people,
Yes. Yeah.
because people feel so entitled to make sense of things. Like
Mm-hmm.
your kids who are the same age, but one's a white girl, one's a black boy. Like, how does that work? To,
Yeah.
to say to talk about how inappropriate it is for random strangers to know all of the details of the story.
Yeah.
But the trouble, or the work, is creating that script that both feels good and honoring to you
Mm-hmm.
and has your intended outcome of them leaving you alone or whatever
Yes.
it is.
Yes, yes. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. It's funny because even as I was writing my book, I had, a couple early readers, and one feedback I got was like, well, I don't feel like I want to know more about your boys' perspective. Or like, I want to hear how your boys feel. And I was like, I'm
You're like,
not
is
here
it
to
my
tell
place to
that.
yeah.
Right, and even some, I'd gotten some pushback on like, well, it just feels really centered on your experience, and I'm like, but that's the only thing I can center. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
can't, I
I'm just
can't,
like,
yeah,
I just say thank you from an adoptee's perspective, because our stories are just, people are like vultures with them. Tell me
yeah,
more. Like, wait, were you an orphan and now you're successful? Wait, how did this? And it's like, adoption is, being an adoptee, it's hard to put the fence around.
yeah,
And I think a lot of parents, since your stories like do intertwine, it's hard to figure out
right.
like, okay, where does my story end and
It
his
is.
start?
Yeah, it is. And I think, for me, it was like in writing the book, it was like I just ran it all by them, like, does this feel comfortable? Does this feel comfortable? Because I had never, until I wrote the book on the blog, I had really Like, people knew my kids were adopted, and they knew, I think people knew where Kembe was adopted from. I never shared Japta's adoption story really at all. Um, and there's just details that I had never shared, just because I didn't feel like they were old enough to say, you know?
Right, right. And for something that's going to live on
Yeah.
for eternity on a website or in a book, it's like,
Yeah.
we need their consent.
Yeah, I felt that. I did feel that. And even then, there were aspects of it where in the book, like, I kind of like wrote the whole story out and then I pulled a lot out, Like, I was like, I don't know if I want to say that much about
Sure. Yes,
birth family, or it's difficult because you want to honor everybody involved.
absolutely. And still have your own position on it,
Yeah.
like your original. It is really
Right.
hard.
And then you keep, then you're left with like you're not writing anything, but
Exactly. Yes. The writing process has been really fun and has gotten scarier and scarier as the publication date comes closer and
totally.
closer.
Totally.
Is that
Totally.
how it works? Is that just it?
Yes, I think it is. I really do. When you kind of, it's one thing, I mean, because you do, writing online, to hit send and know, like, well, I could edit it later. Or I could pull the whole thing down, but just to know, like,
Yes.
it's being published in papers.
Yes. It's
It's a lot. Yeah, it's
it's
a lot.
been so exciting at the same time.
Well,
Yeah.
before we close, I would love you to share a little more about the mentoring you do. So if people who are watching are interested in either getting mentoring for their own child, or if, as people are wanting to support Black businesses, if they would be interested in like sponsoring you so that you could mentor a child who otherwise maybe couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people can go on my website, angelatucker.com, and I do a few things, but one is individual mentoring, and that's with kids 12 and up.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. It's just a safe space for these kids to talk about whatever is on their mind without their parents being present. So
Yeah.
there is a level of trust there that the parents must understand that
Mm-hmm.
these conversations can only really be had with safety and trust that they're
Totally.
private.
Yeah.
Um, and then I also host a lounge space for adopted youth together, so no more than 5 kids at a time in like a Zoom call with me.
Mm-hmm.
And usually they all know each other first, but sometimes it's a little bit random, and that's the same sort of deal, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
nice to hear other kids
That's
their
so
age and
cool.
just build relationships. It's so fun. I have a Canadian group right now, and they're
Mm-hmm.
spread across Canada, but and I did that last year with a group. Actually, I did individual sessions with 5 girls who didn't know each other, and then they all worked really hard with me. But the end of the year, I had them all come out to Seattle and just did like an Oprah style day with them where
So
uh,
fun.
and this was all through generous donors, but we got to have Cheesecake Factory lunch and then go to a play together, walk around
I
downtown
love
Seattle, and
that.
I gave them a gift bag full of like nail polish and all this teen girl stuff.
They'll
So
never forget that. I love that.
it was really, I mean, it was as impactful for me as it was
Yeah,
for all of them.
I bet.
So I'm I am hoping to be able to do something similar each year where I
Yeah.
get groups of adoptees together in the same space after
Hmm.
doing so much virtual work together.
Yeah.
And so I'm always open for suggestions and donations and
Yeah.
sponsorships to make things like that happen. Um, the adoptee lounge spaces I have also for college age kids and then for adult adoptees. And once a month, I do it for adoptive parents to come in and talk about some adoptee centric stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so that is where I would just love more to to be involved with more youth and
Yeah.
more adoptees in general. But yeah, it's a hard time financially right now, and I'm not a
Hmm.
therapist, and so there's no insurance to bill or anything like
Right.
that, and that can
Yep.
make it tough
Yeah.
financially.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
this will all be in the links as we're talking,
great.
so anyone who's following along can see
And
it.
my other favorite thing is this. adoptee manifesto. I don't know if you can
Mm-hmm.
see it. You can't really see it very well. But I created this adoptee manifesto as a way to like empower adoptees around many of the things that we are often told we can't do.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you can't really love your foster parents, your adoptive parents, and your birth parents all at the same time. Like, you kind of gotta,
Mm-hmm.
who do you love more? And so, this manifesto is like reclaiming, like, yeah, we can love more than
Mm-hmm.
one family, and
Yeah.
that we do have a right to have our original birth certificate, and that we do. So it's like kind of an
Yes.
empowering proclamation of positivity in this sector where a lot of it is kind of negative or pushing us back or repressing things.
Mm-hmm.
So the adoptee manifesto is also on my website, and I think it's been a really cool gift for
Yes.
people to give to other adoptees in their
I
lives,
love
and I've
that.
loved seeing that.
I love it. And did you it's like I love the design of it too. I mean, I'm a font nerd, but
Yay!
I love the
Yes.
lettering and it's pretty too.
Yeah, I hired a friend to do it because I've always loved her handwriting,
Yeah,
and so
that's so fun.
she made it pretty.
I
Yeah,
love it. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. You have always been so generous, and I just am so appreciative of you, just being a person who's taken your own experience and just made it your life's mission to, make this better for others. I just appreciate it so much.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk again once that book is out.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
thanks,
I'll talk to you
Kristen.
soon, Angela.
Bye.
Bye.